Well, hey, welcome to On Fire Empire. We're kicking off episode number 41. And today I've got my new co-host, Rachel Bennett, in the studio with me. Hey, Rachel.
Hello.
Are you ready for this today?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so I'll tell you about it in just a second. But, Rachel, I've got a question for you. Do you recognize this? I'm just curious if you recognize this.
Oh, boy. Hello. A sign that haunts my dreams.
Is this like a blast from the past?
Sure.
So
yeah.
so what do you what kind of thoughts does this and memories does this bring back for you?
Well, these were plastered all throughout the house. I can't even tell you what year that is.
I think this was from 2010.
Mm-hmm.
So it's only been 10 years or so.
Sure.
Yeah. So come on. What kind of memories does this jog for you? Any
well,
good times?
I had escaped by that point. Well, I had gone off to college when this was happening, but I remember that well.
And this is kind of a blast from the past from back in my elected official years. This, I think, was campaign number 2 on the re-elect, right? So, but I think you helped quite a bit on the first campaign back in 2006.
Sure.
How old were you then, Rach?
16, 17, maybe?
Yeah?
Yeah.
And what are your fondest memories of working on a local campaign for local office at 16, 17?
Definitely lots of sign placement, lots of following you around to old people homes and...
Well, that's an interesting perspective from a 16-year-old or a 17-year-old. But I remember back in the day when and I say we because it was kind of a family decision, probably more me and Dad making the decision to run for local office. Had never done that before, but it became a family affair. And you went out on the campaign trail with me at 16 or 17 years old. And you were really helpful at the campaign events when we were putting out the platform, having the discussions with lots of residents, and people loved you. You were really pretty impressive. I think I saw your attorney future being forecasted in those days. Well, we're going to have an interesting discussion, and we'll debrief it after the interview. But today on the podcast, we're featuring my discussion with my guest, Lori Stone. You remember Lori? You've known her for years, haven't you?
Sure.
Yeah. So Lori she's a local businesswoman. She's had. Did you know that Lori owned a chain of beauty supplies and had? I think she said 80 employees or something to that effect, but she had a huge number of beauty supply businesses or stores rather, and then she went to work for, in her career, her brother, who is really well known in our area in Southern California, Jeff Stone, when he became a county supervisor, and you knew Jeff too. You remember those days of elected office. We got to work with Jeff on quite a few things for the county. And so Lori worked for her brother as a legislative assistant, and during that time with the county, she actually, we'll hear in this interview, she formed a commission on women. And where this is going is she then became a big advocate for women in the Southwest Riverside County area, as well as she became an advocate for women and families who suffered from domestic violence and sexual assault, and all kinds of boards that she appeared on. But the topic today in that interview with Lori Stone is about what happens when women lead. And we're bringing in, I brought in this good old fashioned campaign sign because Lori happens to be now, after all this time, and her brother went on to become a state senator in California, and now he works for, I believe it's the Department of Labor for the federal government. But Lori now, after all of these years, has decided to step up, and she's running for office. And so she's stepping into this interesting role, and I'm about 99% sure she's going to win and get on the local city council for Murrieta. So proud of her. But it's such a great discussion on what happens when women lead. And I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that, Rachel, after the interview.
Sure, absolutely.
I mean, and by the way, before we jump in, did your experience growing up, I would say junior high through high school and college, watching different women within our family step into leadership roles, whether it be in business or government or other roles, did that influence any of your choices for career, since you're now a woman who leads in the law business?
I'm sure it did. Yeah, absolutely. It's always good to have a good model for what's possible, and I think the bigger and greater things that you see your immediate family doing, the more you think you can do as well.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. It models what's possible.
Sure.
Well, here's my interview with Lori Stone, and we'll debrief in a few minutes.
The future is now.
So Lori Stone, what a pleasure to have you in studio today. Thank you for joining me here.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's a real privilege.
Thank
and
you.
I think this is going to be a great conversation on when women lead. And we're really looking at today why we need women in leadership in both government and the corporate world and things of that nature. And looking at why sometimes women are a little hesitant to step up into those roles. And for our listening audience, I'm really excited. You may wonder about our set here. Well, as we mentioned in the introduction, Lori, you're running for elected office, local office here for the City Council for the city of Murrieta in our hometown here in Southern California. And I'm so excited because I've got that past background as well. And so it's kind of fun. We're featuring my old campaign signs, and here's Lori's current campaign sign. So here you are stepping up into this leadership role, but leadership isn't something that's foreign to you.
Correct.
All right. Well, Lori, as we begin, I wanted to look at a couple of statistics, which is super interesting. So as we talk about when women lead, right now, there's a lot more women in politics, in government, and of course in corporate leadership. But what I think is interesting is there are not as many as we think there might be. So I was looking at the stats as of today here in 2020. And so currently we're in the 116th Congress. And there's a record number of women in Congress now, but it's still a long, long way until we get to some parity there. And I thought the stats were interesting. There are 23.7% of the seats filled in Congress between both the House and the Senate. Only 23.7% are women. And so in the House, women hold 101 out of 435 seats. And what's interesting there also, when we really start to break it down, and we're not going to get into partisanship, but I do think it's interesting to see 88 of those seats are Democrats and 13 are Republicans.
Wow.
And then in the Senate, women hold 26 of the 100 seats, 17 Democrats, 9 Republicans. So it's pretty interesting to see. It feels like there's a lot more women stepping up, but when we look at the percentages, I think they're still pretty abysmal in that respect.
I agree. Absolutely.
It's shocking because doesn't it? I mean, I guess we hear it in the media. It feels like there's more, but they're not. And then, going back to, so Nancy Pelosi became the first female Speaker of the House, but that wasn't until 2007. How is that happening?
I know, it's crazy, isn't it?
It's something else. I was sharing with my producer earlier today when we were talking about some of these statistics. A number of years ago, I had the privilege of going on kind of an insider's tour of the Supreme Court in D.C. And as we got up to above the courtroom there, and most people know this, there's a basketball court, which they lovingly refer to as the highest court in the land. And attached to that is a workout room, which is where the justices can exercise and all of that. And so our guide, who happened to be, she was one of the longest serving staff members of the court, and was a beautiful lady in her 70s. And she'd seen John Roberts when he was a law clerk, filing things with the court. So she'd seen the court for 40 plus years. And she mentioned that Sandra Day O'Connor, when she got appointed by President Reagan, looked at that gym up there and said, we need to have some exercise classes and yoga classes with all the other women who work for the court. The only problem was the pushback she got was the women had said, we're not sure how we'll do that. Now, mind you, this is 1981,
right.
Okay? So not that long ago. Their concern was it was still the outstanding rule in the court that any female employee of the United States Supreme Court was not allowed to wear pants.
Wow. And that was back in 1981?
1981. And so Justice Sandra Day O'Connor changed that rule, because obviously we can't be working out in a skirt and doing yoga.
Right.
But I was shocked to hear that. So, boy, I think
it's come a long ways in just a short amount of time.
Yes.
We really have.
Yeah, a long ways and not so long.
Yes.
Not so far.
Correct. Yes.
So I just wanted to throw that out to you, because I bet you didn't know that. I found
did not know that.
Very interesting. Well, as I shared with everyone in my introduction of you, you've been a woman business leader, business owner. You've worked as a leader in politics for many, many years. And so here you are throwing your hat into the ring now in 2020 to get onto the Murrieta City Council. And I have a feeling that, we're only, a month out from the election?
Yes.
I have a feeling we're going to be seeing you sitting on the dais.
Thank you.
But, let me ask you the question, Lori, share with us. What motivated you after all these years? And, okay, we're going to come clean on our ages, right? I'm 55, and you're?
58.
58. Okay, so 58 years old. I mean, we know that's not old.
Correct.
But still, why at 58? What motivated you to throw your hat in the ring at this stage of the game?
Well, as a prior business owner, I understand what it is to sign the front of a check. And having 5 beauty supply salon stores that I built myself, and navigating employees, independent contractors, customers, I want to take that business sense and bring it to government. After I sold my chain of beauty supplies, I went to work for 3rd District Supervisor Jeff Stone, who happens to be my much older brother. And
did you say
much older brother?
Much older.
Of course.
Okay,
yes.
Jeff, if you're listening.
And I was his legislative assistant for women's issues. And from there, I dealt with the changing face of homelessness, domestic violence, sexual assault. And then I became the chairwoman for the Riverside County Commission for Women. So outreaching the social issues and working for him for over 10 years, I understand the process of government. So I understand the private sector, I understand the public sector. While I worked for Jeff, I caught the attention of our former district attorney, Rob Pacheco, and our former district sheriff, Stan Sniff. And we collaborated. And again, it's all about education and outreach. And so they appointed me to be the spokesperson for the SAFE team, Sexual Assault Felony Enforcement Task Force, where I traveled all through Riverside County. I spoke before nonprofits, service organizations, to educate them how to keep their children safe. From there, after I left Jeff, I actually went to work for our former Sheriff Stan Sniff for about 1.5 years. I did a project for him.
What was that project?
And it was to redesign and implement if there was an in the line of duty death. So if that were to happen in Riverside County, I updated the policy and procedure manual. And so it took me about 1.5 years to do that, and it's completed. It's ready to go in the event. And then one day, a friend of mine invited me to breakfast, and you encouraged me to take my level of fundraising, which I did for many nonprofits, my level of politics to the next level, and open up a political management company, which I did, and which I still own today, which is actually very successful. So our mutual friend, Kelly Ciarto, who is a current city council member for the city of Murrieta, I'm doing his grassroots campaign for state assembly. And I do believe that he's going to win. And he and I got to know each other professionally. We've always been friends. And he said, you know, Lori, you would really be a phenomenal city council person, taking the successes of the past in the current and taking us into the future. So I really thought about it, because I never thought that I would ever really run for public office. And after considering it, I thought, why not? Why not take my journey, my experiences, and apply it to today and to the future of Murrieta? And so that's the reason why I'm running.
I love that. I mean, you, in prior conversations, you said something along the lines of politics is always about timing.
Correct.
And so I love that Kelly Ciarto encouraged you to do something you hadn't really thought about doing before, but that you were open to it.
Yes.
You had an open mind to it. And I think he's absolutely right. You're taking, I don't know, 20 plus years of experience in business and government and in nonprofit relations.
Yes.
I mean, all those things. And I'm glad you were able to connect the dots and see how that could really serve the city. So what would you say really helped you, say, okay, you know what, I'm going to do this. I think we need to have another woman on the city council. Was there anything in particular beyond Kelly Ciarto encouraging you as you looked at all the experience you had?
I am a out-of-the-box thinker. I like to be very creative. And because I understand the private sector, I understand the public sector, I really want that partnership. And as we are in recovery mode right now financially with the businesses in our community, I want to be a partner with our Chamber of Commerce. With my business sense, I believe that I can assist the Chamber and be very creative. And again, even with the city of Murrieta, thinking outside the box, what can we do to navigate the recovery mode with the city of Murrieta? And so, you know what? I prayed about it, Kelly.
Yeah.
And my question was answered, and I believe that everything is about timing. And right now, taking all my experience and with the recovery mode that we are in, not just really in Murrieta or even our county, but really nationally, it's a very exciting time and a challenging time, and I look forward to the challenges.
Well, and I love that because a lot of times I think women will look at their age and where they are in life, and again, we're by no means old, but when we're getting into our mid to late 50s and we got 60 on the horizon, I think a lot of women look at that and, I don't know, I'm getting too old I could never do that, I'm too old. But, we have this saying around here that God is preparing you for what he has prepared for you. And as you had these 20 years of all these different experiences, I'm so glad, and I truly believe you were being prepared, for this time, this moment now, and that's what he's got prepared for you. Thank you for answering that call. I think that's beautiful.
Thank you. With regards to my age, I feel younger at 58 than I did at 40.
Yeah.
I feel more alive today, and I have actually more energy today.
I get that.
And again, I think it's the new 40 with the new 50, and I'm close to 60. But I feel much younger today than I did even 20 years ago.
Well, and don't you think some of that's because after, 50-something, you just don't really give a rat's red rump about certain things? We don't worry too much about... We don't care what you think about us. We are beyond that.
And also, for women, being mothers, So not only was I a business owner, but I had 2 young babies that I brought to work with me.
Yeah.
I had a backpack, I had a front pack, I navigated 5 stores with 2 babies. I was married, I had a household. You know, my community involvement, it was very, very overwhelming, and it was just enough to navigate all those responsibilities in my mid-20s, 30s, and 40s. Well, now it's just all about me. I'm a grandmother.
Right.
My children are serving our country, and they're off doing their own thing.
Yeah. Oh,
and for the
that's
first
fantastic.
time, it's all about what I want to do. And so I want to serve in this capacity. And so age is not a problem.
I think that's where a lot of the energy comes from. You know, absolutely. Is you've got this. You've put in the work.
Put in the work. Absolutely.
Let's talk for a minute about the differences between men and women in leadership, and whether it's a serving in government or a serving in the boardroom and on executive committees, being CEOs, chief financial officers, chief operating officers, all of those things. What have you seen over time that you think women bring to the table that men do not? And again, I know we are great lovers of men, you and
Absolutely.
I.
Absolutely.
This is not a male bashing thing.
No.
But I think sometimes people are a little gun shy of acknowledging and celebrating that there are differences. We're wired differently.
We are wired differently, and
Yeah.
there are differences. And again, this is not a bashing session towards men
No.
in any ways, but it goes back to what I said. I was a young mother. I brought my children to work with me. So to be a mother to 2 young babies, navigating 5 stores, employees, ordering, independent contractors, paying the rent, and then making sure that my children were first, that balance. My relationships with my employees and my customers, being a wife, being in the community and giving of myself to my community, running a household. Back 30 years ago, all men had to do was go to work and come home and provide the finances. And again, the women typically, again, this is my opinion based on the women that I am friends with and the women that I know, they run the household and all the finances. They pay all the bills. So with those experiences come empathy, sympathy, caring, negotiations, and we bring all those to the table today. And so that's why I believe that women are far more successful as CEOs, owners of businesses, an elected official, because look what we've had on our shoulders and look how we can multitask and get the job done.
Yeah, and I think it's super interesting to take all of that comes from traditional roles and see how that translates into business. I hadn't really thought about it before we had that conversation about the multitasking piece.
Yes.
And it bringing experience. Negotiation is just one of my most favorite things in the world to do.
And mine too, by the way. I love it.
Negotiating.
Yes.
And there's always room for improvement, but I don't think a lot of women realize how much they navigate through as they're raising families and working and all of the things that we do, and how much negotiation experience. Even if you don't think you're very good at negotiation, you're negotiating all kinds of things all day long.
We as women, as mothers, business owners, as an employee moving up the ladder, even in our congregations, we are always negotiating because we have to be able to negotiate.
Yep.
And that's part of multitasking.
Yep.
And accomplishing successes in our lives, whether it is, with the babysitter, whether it is with our employees and our husbands, our mother-in-laws, our friends. I mean, it's a daily task that women take on, and they don't even realize that they're doing it.
Right. Oh, yeah. I think I think that's so encouraging for women who may be thinking about stepping into leadership, or they may think that they don't have the chops for it, they're not quite sure. Give yourselves a little more credit.
Absolutely.
So let's roll back to this thing you talked about, multitasking and empathy, and also creativity. And I think what's so interesting is I want people to know about the little experiment you did quite some time ago when you were working in government and you were looking at the changing face of homelessness. And how empathy and your creativity as a woman leader at the time played into that. Will you share about your experiment?
Yes, so as I said, I was a legislative assistant on women's issues. And at the county level, back in 2009, when we were experiencing a horrific recession, families like you and I were becoming homeless. Grandparents raising grandchildren were becoming homeless. Women of domestic violence, because domestic violence was at an all-time high, were becoming homeless. So at that time, it wasn't the typical stereotype of man or woman who were on drugs or alcohol. It was families that were financially struggling. Our food banks their shelves were completely empty.
I remember.
And so as the chairwoman of the County of Riverside Commission for Women, we talked about how we could outreach and raise awareness for this issue. So we invited every clergy and elected officials and community leaders, and I wanted to show them what it was like to be not the typical stereotype man or woman who was homeless, and I went undercover. So the first phase of going undercover, I was an executive dressed in a suit. My sign said that I was educated, I was homeless, and I needed to feed my children. And I stood on an off-ramp of a freeway. And in 20 minutes, I made $140.
Wow.
People were throwing money. And the only reason why it stopped is because the CHP said it was illegal for me to be on the off-ramp and basically said I had to leave. But I raised $140 in 20 minutes. The next day, I went in front of a grocery store, and then I became the disheveled, typical stereotype homeless. I had not showered in days. I put coffee grinds all in my fingernails and down my neck, and I looked horrific. And in 40 minutes, I made, I think, $112. But the sad thing is that the general manager of this grocery store had to stop it because people were threatening to hurt me, and they were threatening to call the police. And so, therefore, sadly, the general manager had to shut it down.
Wow.
But
now, what were you doing that was making them so hostile towards you?
Asking for food. But it was how I looked. I looked like a dirty, drugged out, disheveled homeless person.
Wow.
And sadly, there's one story that still sticks with me today. And a gentleman gave me some money, and the news crew followed him to his vehicle and asked him, "Why did you give her money?" And he said, "Because his son is homeless. He has no idea where his son is, and he prays that somebody would give his son some money or food, and he hoped that people would be empathetic towards his son." And so it was just his way of giving back.
Wow. Wow. What an extraordinary experience.
Yes.
And I think there's some video
Yes.
out there. I think Jose's going to, our producer Jose is going to be looking for that. And if we can find the link, we may link
It's
it.
Lori Stone, homelessness.
There we go.
Yes.
See, Jose,
You
now
can
you know where to
YouTube.
look.
Yes. Yes.
For it.
It was a great experience.
Yeah, I think, but I love the fact that experience and your creativity with it. I think that's a female thing. I mean,
is.
men are creative. Don't get me wrong, but I think that is a prime example of where you mixed your empathy, your compassion for people, and creativity, and getting to the bottom of this. Because I remember back in 2009, I was in office, and I can remember we were talking about the homelessness issue in Southwest Riverside County, and there were quite a number of male counterparts who didn't believe that there was a problem whatsoever. Happening here, not in our backyard. So I like that you were able to, you went with your gut.
I went with my gut, and it was everything that you said. It was about education, and that's so important when you're able to educate people about an issue. And from that experience, there were two positive things that I know that came from it. The Professional Women's Roundtable decided to do a peanut butter drive because peanut butter is the number one source of protein that food pantries cannot keep on the shelf. And I believe it's their 10th year right now of doing the peanut butter drive. Yep. And then Rancho Community Church started a program where they were growing vegetables, fruit, in a property, I believe in Rainbow. And I think about 7 years ago, they had reached out to me to let me know that they had fed over, they'd given away more than 1 million meals.
Wow.
So something positive that I know of came out of that outreach.
Yeah, how wonderful.
Yes.
And it snowballs. Well, another example that comes to mind, and it's having the female filter in leadership, and this was just a small thing, but years ago when I was on the city council, it was time for the budget, and so we were looking at all of the community projects, and the staff was presenting, here's the proposed budget, and let's fix these restrooms, let's do these facilities, all of that. And so that came before us, and I was the only woman at the time on that council. And as we were talking about baseball fields, of all things, because the city of Murrieta has a ton of ball fields. It's a big thing in the city. And so we were talking about which field needed help and this, that, and the other. And a couple of ladies came forward to the podium, and they had little girls with them, and they were in softball uniforms. And I'll never forget, one of the moms said, our girls play on this field there because there's a lot more boys in the league than there are girls teams. And we play on this particular field, but it is the field that is the least kept up. It has the most divots and holes in the field because it's just the girls' field. And the bathrooms have no doors on the stalls. They are... And they showed pictures. It was horrible. They are in absolutely horrible condition. And we see that it's low on the list for funding, where all these other ball fields are higher because it's where the boys play. But we don't feel comfortable letting our little girls go in there and using the restrooms. And we just asked that maybe you could pay some more attention to this. So the conversation came back up to the dais, and we were talking about all of this, and I sat listening to my colleagues, and they were talking about, well, there's more demand at these fields, and we have to prioritize them, blah, blah, blah. And I just sat back for a moment, and finally I said into the microphone, gentlemen, haven't we all decided that we want to encourage young girls in our community to step into leadership and to show that we value them? Oh, yes, yes, yes. And I said, so what is the message when these little girls don't have a decent bathroom to go to, and their ball fields are so torn up that it's dangerous, and we're throwing all the money to the fields where all the boys play?
Right.
And to my colleagues' credit, you could almost hear an audible gasp because they didn't realize it didn't hit them, but it took a mom hearing this and totally understanding. I have 2 little girls. Well, they're not so little anymore, but you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
So it was the female filter, just like having the female approach on this problem of homelessness. I think it's just really important that perspective gets demonstrated and participates in the leadership of our communities.
Yes.
So,
and thank you for speaking out.
Well, it just was one of those things that it just happened to occur to me that it wouldn't have to my male counterparts because they have a different experience.
Correct.
In life. That's all. Well, let's move into this other little subject matter while we're talking about the differences. I shared with you before this interview an interesting article that I had come across on a website called theconversation.com. And this was an article published from Canadian public health researchers. It was two gentlemen, one from the University of Waterloo and the other one from the University of Toronto. And this was from January of 2019. And they published their findings on the effect of having more women in positions of power on the health and well-being of the population that they serve. And so these studies were done in Canada, and it was only a few short years before this article came out that Justin Trudeau had won the Prime Minister's position. And in 2015, the first thing he did when he appointed his cabinet is, out of the 30 top cabinet members, he appointed 15 were women. And that was hands down the most women that had ever served in a presidential prime minister's cabinet at the time. And he was asked, well, why did you appoint 15 women? And his response was pretty short and to the point. It was because it's 2015.
Right.
It was fantastic.
Yes,
thank you,
it.
Prime Minister Trudeau.
Yes.
But within that kind of context, these public health researchers found that when more women are in power in government, mortality rates were going down of the general population. And the reasons for the lower mortality rates, because that sounds kind of funny, doesn't it?
Yes.
Like, I was surprised at this.
Yes.
But the reasons they found were, one, female politicians were more likely to champion pay equity. We'll talk about pay equity in a minute because I know how you feel about that. They were more apt to champion and advocate for, not for violence against women, but to combat violence against women, and more likely to champion healthcare and family policies. And then the second finding was that women tend to advocate spending more on medical care, preventive care, social services, and post-secondary education. And then this kind of dovetails into what you mentioned earlier about collaboration and the experience you've had. They found that women are more collaborative and bipartisan when addressing these issues, and it advances those policies that directly affect general health and welfare of the population. And so mortality rates were going down. So having said all that, Lori, what do you think about those findings, and do you agree with what their observations were?
I don't know if I agree with their observation, but they definitely tackled the issues at hand, and everything that's in that report is true. I mean, based on what we talked about earlier, women have to advocate. We have to advocate for our own health care today, sadly. I have a girlfriend who's been diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer. And based on our health care today, she is on the phone daily advocating for her chemotherapy, for her radiation, matter of fact, she had to have a new port put in. And right before she had to go into surgery, she had not been authorized. So she's been in the system for 2 years. And on top of fighting for her life, she has to advocate and fight for services. So women today also have to advocate. As far as pay equity, you know how I feel about pay equity. It is absolutely ridiculous that CEOs, when a man is hired to do a position and that person's gone off and now the woman has been promoted to that position and she's paid, 25% less for the exact same position? Right. That is just such baloney. What were the other issues? Being advocate, pay equity, collaboration,
across bipartisan
correct
lines.
And that comes from experience with us having to negotiate. We have to collaborate with our peers. We have to collaborate with our boss, our employees, our husband, our children, healthcare. So I can see women doing that and being very successful at it. So yes.
Yeah, and I think that whole collaboration piece, there's just a lot more of that going on, and sometimes, look, we can be as competitive as the rest of them.
Absolutely.
Sometimes. I have my moments where I have to dial it back because that competitive thing comes in. Not everybody's like that, but I've noticed that a lot of times when we see differences in the genders at the negotiation and collaboration table, sometimes the competitive spirit becomes a zero-sum game.
Yes.
And the reality is, in negotiation, and the key to collaboration is doing what we call going below the line. And that is, here's the issues up here, right? And it's whatever the topic is of the day. But the reality is, if we have 3 or 4 different interests at the table or positions at the table, they have interests that are down here below this line. And a lot of times people just negotiate up here.
Correct.
Our position is, no, but really, if we've got 2 or 3 at the table, they might have different interests. If we go below the line to those interests, we might be able to satisfy all or most of them. And that's where collaboration really comes in.
Absolutely.
Versus it's a win or lose proposition here.
Correct.
Yeah.
I agree wholeheartedly.
And
yes.
I think with your homeless experiment, what you did there was you set the stage for making that a much bigger discussion and not a black or white issue.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that was beautiful.
that issue, again, our vets are homeless. Sadly, as an attorney, you can relate to grandparents raising grandchildren.
Yes.
The parents are on drugs or
Yep.
incarcerated. They live in a 55-year-old community. They get their grandchildren. Now they're forced out of their 55-year-old community, and now they're going to go rent an apartment. So yes, as far as homeless, there's a plethora of reasons why people are homeless, and we have to be able to offer resources for all types of homelessness.
And you're able to, because you've been there, done that with the experiment, recognize all those different interests that are at the table and be able to speak to them.
Correct.
And I think we get a lot more done that way.
And I want to take that experience and bring that to the dais if elected. So that's something that I really look forward to, is collaborating, negotiating, and also thinking outside the box and being able to deliver my message to where my other 4 colleagues can understand where I'm coming from.
Yes.
That's a very, very important, to be able to educate and communicate.
Yes.
And have empathy.
Yep, huge.
Yes.
Okay, so let's kind of shift for a second. Let's talk to some of the women that may be listening to us today who think, well, I don't know. There's a variety of reasons that I don't know that I could lead. I've asked Jose, who's sitting behind the cameras, to do a little bit of what we call fast pitch fear.
Okay.
And what we're doing is we're going to have Jose tell us what the objections of some of our ladies in the community might have. I mean, as well as I do, we can probably name right now 5 or 6 women that we can see great leadership characteristics in. We know that if they stepped up, and it's risky and it's uncomfortable, I mean, anything worth doing, I think, usually is. But they might give us some opposition as we encourage them to step into leadership roles within their own business, within other businesses, or government. So Jose's going to pitch a couple of those objections to you and I.
Okay.
And we're going to give 1 or 2 line answers right off the top of your head. Okay, Jose, so what's the first one? What's the first fear?
So, well, once again, to the woman who would be a great leader, what would you say to the woman that says, I'm afraid that I'll be criticized?
Well, sadly, it's human nature to criticize. I mean, people do criticize, even though you may be doing an excellent job of navigating your business, there's always criticism. And you just have to rise above it. And, in politics we call it, being thick-skinned. And if you have a mentor, I believe in mentors, and you're struggling with some criticism, lean on your mentor. Lean on somebody that can give you some advice. Sometimes the person that's criticizing may not always have all the facts either. So being able to own your position and being able to articulate your stance and owning it will give you power.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, we're going to get criticized no matter what.
No matter what. Exactly.
And
it's just human nature.
And there's a certain amount of, sometimes you just don't need to read the critical comments.
I agree. I'm not on Twitter, by the way.
Yeah, good for you.
So, I'm barely even on Facebook. I'm barely on Instagram. But for me, it's to stay in my own lane and stay focused on the goal and what I'm projecting, what my stance is, like the homeless.
Yeah.
I got criticized for doing that project, but I knew in my heart by doing this undercover work, I was going to be able to outreach, and those that wanted to be on my train with me and ride the train, those are the people that I focused on.
Right.
And that's what we have to focus on. Our tribe, who's like-minded like ourselves, those women that are going to build us and bring us up and not criticize us. And sometimes we have to reevaluate our lives from time to time and look who is in our lives. And it's okay even at 60 years old to say, you know what? I don't think that this person is a positive influence in my life, and it's okay just to kind of back off.
That's amen, girlfriend.
Yes.
Hey, we talk a lot around here. We've done a lot of trainings and podcasts on the importance of the inner circle.
Yes.
And you better pay attention to it. I'll tell you one little trick, and if I can offer some advice as you go into office on this criticism piece. I had some trusted members of my inner circle who would read all the stuff that came in for me. And they would let me know when there was something I needed to look at. And that is, some criticism, it's good and we should consider.
Absolutely.
And
yes.
Do they have a point? And a
Correct.
lot of it is just junk. And so they would bring to me, like I said, they were the trusted ones. They would bring to me the things that were legitimate concerns and to be looked at, and the rest of it was just garbage. And so I would say, don't drink the haterade.
Absolutely.
There's no
Yes.
drinking the haterade, because that's just a waste of your time.
But there is positive criticism.
Yes.
And yes, we can learn by something that we may have overlooked. So
Of course.
absolutely, there's always growth with criticism.
Yeah.
But when somebody's criticizing because of the color lipstick that you're wearing,
Yeah.
or the fact that maybe black does not look good on you, that's the kind of stuff that we need to avoid.
Right. And that's where your inner circle can come in and give you the buffer.
Yes.
You don't need to look at it. All right, Jose, what do you have next?
Okay, so what would you say to the woman that says, I'm afraid to be the only woman in a male-dominated group of leaders?
Well, I say bring it on. I love the challenge, and if you have confidence in yourself and what you're doing in life, whether you're a business owner, a CEO of a company, whether you are sitting on the dais, do not be intimidated by men. Own it and project it and be the leader that you know in your heart that you are, and never allow a man to intimidate you ever.
Yeah, that's good. That's really good. And I think watch for the things. And again, we're not saying that men are out there to get you, right?
No.
But there's some habits and some ways of being. Sometimes I think women feel like they have to be like men in the way they conduct themselves, which I don't think is true at all.
I agree.
I was taught that when I first, I graduated law school in 1990, and I had some well-meaning people tell me that, you needed to wear the grays and the navy blues and very, nondescript suits. And I went, screw that. I like being a female, looking professional, but there was that piece of it. But I will tell you, I would sit at the head of the table in every closed session meeting I could when I could get that seat at the head of the table with all the colleagues being the only woman in the room, because women should be sitting in, I mean, you demonstrate your confidence in the manner in which you speak to people, where you sit. I've watched in so many, in dealing with the county and working on regional panels with the county, watching females come into the room of the big conference rooms where there may not be room at the conference table. Women don't even try to get to the conference table most of the time. They sit along the sides. And I know Sheryl Sandberg talked about this when she was doing a TED Talk years ago, right after Lean In. And she had seen this as well, and I love what she said. She said, take your seat at the table.
Absolutely.
And I think that's so important.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree with you. Absolutely.
All right, Jose, got any more?
Here's the last one for you. So, same thing. What would you say to the woman that says, I'm afraid I'm not good enough?
Well, I'm going to tell you a very short story that's actually a really long story. Two things that happened to me in my career. When I was in high school, I went to ROP to become a hairdresser. And I wanted to be a famous hairdresser. And I graduated early from high school so I could go to ROP and finish. So when I graduated in June, I graduated from cosmetology school. And I decided to become an apprentice instead of just going out and doing hair. So I was an apprentice for 2 years, and on my day off, my ultimate goal was to work in Beverly Hills. And I went to work in Beverly Hills. I went to apply for a job in Beverly Hills, and I had three major hair salons that were famous. They all did movie stars. So I went to the first one, which was Bruno and Suni. Suni does Barbara Streisand's hair and John Lithgow. And so I went in and I interviewed with her, and she said, you have the job, but you have to start tomorrow. And that was a shock to me because now I had to go quit my job that I had been working under this gentleman for 2 years, and I was conflicted about doing that. So I went back to the salon. I talked to the owner of the salon. I told him I had this job opportunity, but I wanted to be respectful and not just leave this person hanging. And the owner of the salon said that I would never, ever make it in Beverly Hills, and that I would never, ever make it as a hairdresser, ever. And he's lucky that I lasted as long as that I did. I left there absolutely devastated. I quit the job, and then my self-esteem went down, and I did not show up at the job the next day because of what he did to me. Well, while that door closed, I decided to take my business experience and my cosmetologist background and open up my very, very first beauty supply. So I went at 23 years old and I signed a lease. And I went home and told my parents that I signed a lease and I'm opening up a beauty supply. And my parents said, you know nothing about the beauty supply business. You know nothing about business. Let's get you out of that lease. And I'm like, absolutely not. So the store, actually I was 22 when I signed the lease. The store was being built and it was going to be a year before that space was available. So I went and worked for free at a beauty supply in Escondido, because we're going back in the early 80s. There was not much here in the Temecula region. And then my mother, I promised my mother that I would take a business course at Mount San Jacinto College in San Jacinto. So I'd drive all the way to Escondido to work, and then I would go to night classes. And my term paper was a profit and loss. It was a business plan, a 3-year business plan. And I worked so hard on that because this was the map of my future. And the professor gave me a D. And he told me the reason why he gave me a D is because I did the work, and he told me I would fail the first year I was in business. 17 years later, 5 stores later, I sold my company. So twice in my life, I had somebody that told me that I was going to fail. I believed enough in myself, even though I had no experience whatsoever, I knew in my heart, in my head, I knew what I needed to do to accomplish my goals, and I went for it. I worked hard to get to that point. And so, you know what? Anytime somebody tells you you can't do it, if you believe enough in yourself, because I'm a proven success 2 times over, anybody can do it.
Yeah. Amen. Amen.
Amen.
To that. Well, Lori, this has been such a pleasure to
Thank
have
you so much.
I mean, what a great conversation. I know that ladies out there listening are going to be encouraged. Hey, if we can do it, they can do it.
Absolutely.
And thank you for stepping up into leadership in our local government. That's where I believe it's most impactful on the day-to-day lives of the citizens versus at the higher levels in the state or even the feds. It's right here where the rubber meets the road. So thank you in advance, because that is a huge position. It's often a thankless position with a lot of work. People don't realize how much work is involved, but it takes people who are intelligent and skilled and kind-hearted and have that huge dose of humility that you have to really make some impact in this world. So I appreciate you so much.
And thank you so much. And if elected, I look forward to collaborating with you, with your legal background as a prior councilwoman, as a community leader. I will look to you for guidance, absolutely. And thank you so much for having me today.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Good times ahead.
Thank you.
All right, so we've got great links to today's episode. You can find them in a number of places. First, you can look at them. The links are here on the YouTube site, right? And so you can click on those links. We're linking to Lori's Facebook page, where you can see, if you've never seen what it looks like to run for office, click on her Facebook page. We've got the link there. And if you want to, you probably can connect with Lori there as well. Or you can head on over to KellyBennettEsquire.com. That's KellyBennettESQ.com/041, and you'll get the show notes and all the links that we've mentioned. And I think we might have a link to Lori's video on her homeless experiment too. All righty, so we'll catch you next time.
Well, we're back. What did you think about that interview, Rachel?
I thought it was great.
Yeah, Lori brings so much to the table. I really thought one of the standout moments was when Lori was talking about, I don't know that I believe that all women are just naturally empathetic. I see a lot of empathy in many women leaders, but Lori kind of tying into empathy as one of the drivers for her diving deep into the issue of homelessness. What did you think about her jumping in like that and going to the extent of impersonating 2 different types of homeless women?
I think a lot of people in leadership, a lot of politicians can learn from that. That's an extreme example of putting yourself in the shoes of the other. But I think our policy would be much better guided, our leadership would be much better guided if more people chose to do that and chose to seek out the different perspective.
Yeah. I think that's well said. And the idea, this is what's interesting. I think a lot of times as women, we are hesitant to, and some people are afraid to, acknowledge the gender differences between male leaders and women leaders. And in fact, I remember, you remember those days when we were running my campaigns, one of the number one things we intentionally did not say or talk about was that I was running for city council where there had been no women in leadership. And remember how we were very intentional about not saying we need a woman leader because it was more by inference? I mean, what do you think about that hesitation to not call out the differences, the positive differences?
Well, I think at the time the idea was not to make you the token woman.
Yeah, that's true.
Right,
That's
and
true.
because it detracted from the substance of your platform and the reason why you were qualified for the position, not just for the novelty of electing the first female councilwoman. But I think as our society progresses and we do see more women in leadership positions, more women in politics, that novelty is wearing off, and I think that opens us up to be able to really hone in on the differences and take advantage of them.
Yeah. And not from taking advantage, meaning
No.
like a campaign. In fact, I think you'll probably remember this story after I got elected. Shortly after, another person who had really wanted to had run a couple of times, a fellow who ultimately got on the council the next election after me, and he ran against me and he lost. Do you remember that story where he was overheard saying in a group of people right after the election, "Oh well, she only won because she was a woman." You know, I mean, so we don't want to take advantage that way, but I just think watching what's going on in Congress even right now, we have more women in Congress than we ever have before, although it's still only like 23%. It's some ridiculously low number, but those taking advantage of the extended skill sets that are brought to the table, so important.
Yeah.
Last thing, Rachel, before we wrap it up. So you're in the 30-somethings, you know, and you're
Just barely.
no, actually, you have to be in the early 20s because I'm not old enough to have a 30-something.
Sure.
But your lady friends who went to law school with you or were in college with you who are out doing other careers right now, what would you say, what do you think their hesitation might be in stepping into leadership? Because it seems like we still have a long way to go when it comes to women being willing to step into those roles or at least go for it and try. What do you think some of the holdbacks would be? I know from the 50-something arena what some of those hesitations would be, but talk to the 30-something generation.
I think I'm blessed to have been able to go through higher education with a group of really bright, motivated women. So I would say my core group of friends are great examples of people who do step up into leadership. But I've chosen that as the people that I choose to surround myself with.
Yeah.
But I think that's self-motivating in and of itself. But maybe others don't have that group of core people who are always supportive and always pursuing like the next thing.
What did you see like a common thread and undercurrent? Did they have key people in their lives that were always telling them they could do it and helped give them a shot of confidence? Or did you see any kind of key or common undercurrent between your friends so your inner circle definitely are a group of movers and shakers. What do you think you all had in common?
Well, I think a good example is a lot of my girlfriends from law school. You look around the room, the majority of the students are female.
Yes.
So we don't feel outnumbered. And you go out in the world and you may feel outnumbered, but where it grows and where you start, being in an environment where we're the majority of the law students.
And the messaging of that optic is really amazing.
And I don't know that was a chosen optic by the law school.
No. Oh,
That's
no,
just
I can't imagine.
statistically what we're looking at right now. And I think that, more than anything is a very motivating factor.
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. We had the privilege of both attending the same law school just a couple years apart. But I remember going into law school as a young married and you know, your father and I got married 2 weeks before we both started Pepperdine Law together. And hearing the stories from your grandfather, who was an attorney, graduated top of his class at USC Law, I remember him telling us the stories as we were starting off on the law school journey, and I'm sure Papa told you these stories too. He graduated in the 60s, and he said he had 2 women in his law school class. That's it, in the 60s. Two women, which kind of brings back the Ruth Bader Ginsburg days. But one of them committed suicide because of the pressure. And I don't recall if the second one made it or dropped out. But when I got to opening day, for example, first day of law school, I remember looking around the room and having those stories in mind. And this was in the late 80s, you know, so you would think, well, that had to have been long gone. But it was almost 50% at the time, women. And what I love is here you come along 20 some odd years later and go to the same law school, and now the scales have tipped the other way. And the majority of what you saw were your women colleagues. So that's fantastic.
Yeah, and I think it's motivating to see the past and see the history, see what Justice Ginsburg did for us.
Yes.
And really take advantage of the position that we're in because of those women who
came before. Oh, what a great point. I think, in a sense, when you think of it that way, and all the hard work that was put in for us as women, us stepping up as women into leadership and bringing everything we can to all our skills to the table, that's one of the biggest ways we can say thank you to those gals who came before us. Gals.
Thank you, Ruth.
Thank you, Notorious RBG, right? Well, hey, thanks for joining us on another episode of the On Fire Empire podcast. Did you like what you heard? If you want to find the links to that video we talked about where Lori Stone did her experiment as a homeless woman, you can find it right on our site at kellybennetesquire.com/041. Kelly Bennett Esquire, that's esq.com/041. You'll also get the show notes there and links to upcoming episodes. If you enjoyed the podcast, hey, do us a favor, give us a thumbs up and give us a little review on iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcast, or on Facebook or on the podcast page. We don't care, do we, Jose? So till next time, live with gusto and ignite your empire.
The future is now.